Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Your captain speaking, John Regan. I'll be sitting in for Vincent this morning. Springtime, and Vincent has farm duties to attend to. He will be back on the air tomorrow. It's Monday, so we have with us Dr. Norm Shealy. Good morning, Dr. Shealy.
Be with you.
It's been a while.
Indeed, it has. What's new?
Well, I'll know more this Friday. I'm having another ferritin test trying to see where my iron levels are. But at least my unexplained weight loss is gone. It was kind of nice having, the weight loss without effort, but that's pretty darn scary.
Wow. So what would you like to talk about?
Well, I guess first off, do you have any, upcoming engagements or projects going on?
Well, I have several. I just got back from a meeting of the American Medical Acupuncture Association, and as usual, American Airlines was horrible, but other than that, that's good. I am doing a project on obesity for people who are not on drugs, who are 40 pounds or more overweight, using pulse electromagnetic frequency to encourage weight loss.
Yeah, and boy, have I learned so many bits to how we've been destroyed over the years. When I first started going down this rabbit hole, my first thoughts that the unexplained weight loss could be cancer, which is one of the symptoms, but the initial test showed that probably wasn't the case. And in fact, it was you had suggested several of the tests, and at the time it was a new book by Dr. McCullough that suggested the ferritin test, and that's where Becky and I found out we both had severe iron and insulin problems. And at least for both of us, the iron's below the really damaging levels now. Just so people that aren't aware of it, the ferritin test shows what the stored iron is in your body. Not the same thing as the iron test that you get in most of the routine physicals. That iron test is what's in your blood. And if the ferritin is over 300 for a man or over 200 for a woman, that's considered hemochromatosis. And it doesn't even have to be that high to inflict damage, like other things that I've got on my list to talk about. Iron causes inflammation. It damages mitochondria. And it's not that it's a bad thing, especially when you're a growing person. So from being conceived up till adult, you definitely need iron. But once you're an adult and once you're a woman that's no longer in the childbearing position, you tend to build up more iron in your body, which causes problems. And I think, years from now, they'll finally determine that part of the reason why men have a shorter lifespan than women is because they have this iron buildup earlier. Women continually lose iron with their monthly cycle, and I do want to thank you. A little over a year ago, you gave me a prescription that allowed me to get my blood drawn because of my service and spending 3 years in Germany. I'm banned for life from donating blood, which is the primary way of getting those ferritin levels down. And that was my big fight in that area. I'm still going, once I have this ferritin test, I'll see if I have any more issues. I'm hoping from this point out I might be able to get by just using an iron chelator like IP6. But it's possible in the future I might have to go get another prescription to get blood drawn, and it's just so sad. Just 2 or 3 times a year would be enough to keep it into a good, healthy range.
Well, anytime. I'm happy to prescribe, to give you that prescription. I haven't. The medical system is so stupid these days. It's as bad as government in general.
Well, I'll let you know if it stays down, then I won't need it. If it creeps up, it won't be as severe a prescription. It'll just be, in essence, it's like just allow me to donate like you would an ordinary person donating blood. 3 or 4 times a year, that's good. I know you can't use my blood because, hey, I may have mad cow. Because of that's the reason people were stationed in Europe can't donate blood is because of the mad cow scare. Fortunately, my wife can donate blood, and that's how we got her taken care of. But that was quite an education myself. I learned years ago that especially men shouldn't be taking iron supplements unless you're specifically short of iron, and to learn just how bad and damaging the problem is. But I mean, good gosh, I've learned so much more, and I'll be glad to get your insights in a lot of these areas today. But I did have a couple of questions that I did want to ask while we were together. One was, I don't think I've ever heard the story of how you woke up from the standard medical training into the holistic area.
Well, basically, when I was in my neurosurgical residency, I was so appalled at the way we were treating chronic pain. There was a procedure called cordotomy. And you go in the operating room and you take off the bone of two levels of the spinal column, and then you break off a piece of an old single-edged razor blade. I'm serious. It was sterile at least. And you put it in a little pair of pliers-like things, and you lift up the spinal cord and stick it in and cut the front half of the spinal cord. It's really barbarian. And I was so appalled at that when I finished my residency. I spent 3 years doing research on pain physiology. And I came up with 2 ways of controlling pain. One, spinal cord stimulation, like a pacemaker over the spinal cord, and the other, TENS or transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. All of a sudden, I was getting 400 people a year sent to me for the spinal cord stimulator. 94% of them were so damaged, they had 5 to 7 unsuccessful back operations. They won't Valium, they won't Percodan. They were so damaged from the system that I wouldn't dare put a pacemaker in them. So in 1971, I decided to jump out of the box and find a way of dealing with chronic pain, depression, anxiety, etc., other than damage. And I started the first holistic clinic in the world. And the first year, I actually treated 400 people with behavioral modification, and we used all kinds of emotional, mental, physical retraining systems. And that was the beginning of my flight from conventional medicine. Now, I like to say conventional medicine is good in acute illness. It's terrible in chronic illness. I don't know a single chronic disease for which I would use any drug offered in the world. That's a brief summary.
And, that's what I, pretty much found out in my journey. Most of the doctors I know that have awakened is because of a personal health issue where their medical indoctrination failed them, or it was a family member. And in fact, I was a bit encouraged. There was a new series put out. The people that did the Truth About Cancer, they just had one where they toured 7 Asian countries talking to doctors there. And some of these countries actually allow some of these, natural alternative treatments. Unlike here, where you can lose your license if you do some of these things. We've talked so much, not only with you, but just regular, how things are in our society today with, what corporations are doing, what the government's doing. It's just gone totally bonkers. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see that getting better anytime soon.
No. As long as there's government, we aren't going to see anything getting better.
We're all ready to our first break. This is John Regan with Dr. Norman Shealy. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. John Regan at the controls today. Dr. Norman Shealy. His website is normshealy.com. And I'd like to just register a small complaint about your new website.
Uh-oh.
I used to know where to go to get your protocols, and I don't know how to find it on your new website.
Well, I will put that in Sergey's mail because he is the one who took it over, and I don't like the new webmaster any more than I like the last one, but we've been having trouble for 3 years getting a webmaster that's worthwhile.
So, along those lines, I'd get you to go over the vitamin D3 and K2 recommendations.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, an article came out just today that moderately high levels of vitamin D3 are essential in helping to prevent and even to treat cancer of the colon. And they're only using 5,000 units a day. My recommendations are if you weigh 140 pounds or more, you take 50,000 units once a week. If you weigh under 140 pounds, you take 50,000 units of vitamin D3 the 1st, 10th, and 20th of every month. In other words, it is safe to get up to 10,000 units of vitamin D3 a day, and it is the single greatest thing you can do to improve your immune system. Now, if you don't have any health problems, if you're just doing it for maintenance, you only need 100 micrograms of vitamin K2 a day. But if you're doing the vitamin D3 not just for health, but to help treat some problem, then you will need to take at least 15 milligrams of vitamin K2 every day. The two are synergistic. They're like Siamese twins, and they work together for the entire immune system.
could even add magnesium on top of that, too.
Oh, yes. Well, everybody needs B complex today, 25 to 50 milligrams or more because of pollution with Roundup and other junk.
Yeah, that's down on my list, too. It's and I remember, years ago listening to your advice, no sugar, no wheat, and I thought that was being a little extreme, and I'll apologize for thinking that. I don't think that anymore. It just takes so long to explain why sugar and wheat are so bad for us now. The processed sugar
is still poison. That's and sugar is really not a food. There is no natural food that has sucrose in it. Normal plants, with the exception of sugar cane, which people ordinarily don't eat as a food, and sugar beets, which people don't eat as a food, are the only two plants that contain a lot of sucrose. Ordinarily, the carbohydrate in plants is either fructose or glucose. Those are much better metabolized than sucrose, but even then, an excess of sugar is dangerous to your health. The average American still consumes his or her weight or more in sugar every year.
I had pulled a dozen or two studies on glucose and sucrose and fructose, and had pretty much come to the conclusion of especially how bad the fructose part was. And not having the educational background, it was going to take me quite some time to try and turn that into something that I could explain to somebody. And it's about that time that I found a couple of videos from Dr. Lustig, and I'll talk about that when we get back from the bottom of the hour break here. John Regan with Dr. Norman Shealy, having a discussion on a variety of topics today. I was talking about what I'd learned from Dr. Lustig, and if you're interested, you can find this information on the University of California television YouTube channel. He did a couple of videos. One was nearly 10 years ago called Sugar, the Bitter Truth, and he followed that up in 2013 with Fat Chance, Fructose 2.0. And one of the things that, let me just say, both of these videos are not real friendly for people that don't have the medical or biological education. You can get good information out of it. Just realize that, without that education, a lot of the terminology you just have to live with. The audience was designed to be people in those fields. But one of the things that really struck me when he got to the end of that first video, Sugar, the Bitter Truth, he put up a slide, 15 people that either had PhD or MD level education, and he singled one out specifically as a PhD that was an expert in fructose. Now, I don't know how many of those there are in the world, but it can't be tons of people. And up until that point where he was helping Dr. Lustig on putting together this information, he came to the realization during that time that fructose is actually toxic. And as far as your liver is concerned, there's really no difference between fructose and alcohol. You just don't have the brain effects where it slurs your speech and gets you high and all of that.
And of course, fructose is also an artificial sweetener. That is, most of the fructose apparently that is added to foods comes from corn, of all things.
Yeah, and the high fructose corn syrup quite often has mercury in it as well.
Oh, yeah.
That's not great for your brain either.
Well, in my opinion, the food industry is as evil as the tobacco industry and the pharmacomafia combined. Because they take good foods and damage them purposefully.
Yeah, and it's true, fruit does have fructose in it, but if you're eating whole fruit, you can eat a reasonable amount of that, and it's not a problem. But if you start processing it, and this is as simple as taking oranges and making orange juice out of it, and if you drink a large glass of orange juice, which would be probably like eating half a dozen oranges, that's going to overload your normal processing system, and that overflow has to go to the liver.
Well, and you basically you lose the fiber, and fiber is an important part of real food.
And probably get into that in part in hour two today when we talk about the gut microbiome. But I did a calculation, and at the time I didn't know which way to go. I was trying to compare the fructose consumption versus alcohol consumption, and all I had to work with, is it based on mass, which is how many grams there is of substance, or is it based on calories, where the carbohydrate is 4 calories per gram, the alcohol is 7 calories per gram, and I did calculations both ways, and then I ended up using recommendations. I forget which society it was, but on limiting the sugar consumption, and I compared that with the recommendations on alcohol consumption, and it pretty much came out to the mass of it, the gram. And the interesting thing is, if you just allow 100 pounds of sugar consumption a year, and it's probably closer to 150 pounds, but at 100 pounds, basically 2 pounds a week, that is the equivalent of downing 35 shots of whiskey a week.
I like the way you do your math. That's a great allegory, Sean.
And if you consider it being more closer to 150 pounds of the sucrose and high fructose corn syrup, that means you're on the order of 50 shots of whiskey a week. That not only you, but you're serving your kids this. And
right.
For adults, for an adult male, you don't want to go over 2 units of alcohol a day, 1 unit a day for women, before it's considered excess.
That's right.
And we wonder why people are getting this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's because it's like they're a very heavy drinker. So, when you give your advice of no sugar, it's a long answer to get behind all of that there, but, that's the reason it's,
Well, interestingly, John, I have not purchased and brought into my house sugar since 1970.
And
I can see no reason to buy it.
Yeah, there's and I've managed to use some other sweeteners, the sumi tomato thing, stevia, stevia, it's been a good choice for a lot of things. I've also been using xylitol or erythritol. And, it's not exactly the same, but I can make a pecan pie that tastes just as good as the stuff loaded with sugar that, won't mess with your body. I've made it once because I just don't have the sugar cravings anymore since getting off of sugar.
And what do you use in the pecan pie?
I'd have to look up it's a fiber-based sweetener that I use in it. It's a liquid, and maybe I can go pull it out of the pantry at the top of the hour break. But there's so many things that you can do if you do have the craving for something sweet like that without having to use sugar in it. And just I'd learned from an obesity doctor over 20 years ago how your body can only hold so many carbohydrates at a time. Once you fill up the stores in your muscle and liver, the excess ends up getting converted to fat. It took me until a couple of years ago to understand, similar thing happens when you eat too much protein, is that protein basically would get converted into a sugar and then into fat. And either way, it's not good for your body. And as you build that fat, which it's happened to me, so I'm doing everything I can to work on reversing that. But as you build that fat, another thing that happens is the fat produces insulin as well. So you're not only getting the insulin from your pancreas, you're getting the insulin from the fat, and that's building up insulin resistance in this feedback loop. And as you're building all of that, your blood sugar goes higher and higher. And then when you reach the appropriate level, you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And then what do the doctors do? Is they treat the blood sugar levels and ignore the insulin and the inflammation that came even before that.
Well, all sounds good. I found one interesting high-fiber sweetener made out of Jerusalem artichoke, which is interesting. There are others, but Jerusalem artichoke, interestingly, is actually good for people with diabetes. I don't know about when they extract the sweetener from it, but the root itself contains some things that are actually good for the pancreas.
And you can even find pasta made out of Jerusalem artichoke.
Yeah. Now that sounds like a great deal, too.
Yeah, get away from the wheat problem there.
Yep.
And I when I was looking at this a couple of years ago, like I say, I had the iron problem, the insulin problem, and then I started seeing other bits of the puzzle here. And Dr. McCullough co-authored a book a few months ago that talked about fats. And I'd known about, there's omega-6s and omega-3s, and that the ratio is way out of whack, and that we need more omega-3, but I didn't really understand how the body was doing all of that. And we'll talk about that when we get back from this break. Don Regan sitting in today, but back tomorrow. Dr. Shealy is here with us. And during the break, I went and grabbed that. It has a viscosity that reminds you of corn syrup. but it's actually made out of tapioca starch. What I've got is called Vita fiber, V-I-T-A fiber, and it has 10 calories per teaspoon, no grams of fat, no grams of protein, no grams of sugar, has a total 4 grams of carbohydrate, and 3 of those are dietary fiber. So
that sounds at least as good as Jerusalem artichokes.
So that's it. To me, it's one of the things to have on hand and use in modified recipes. So anyway, go ahead.
Any food with high fiber is likely to be better for you. We don't eat enough fiber in general, so I will look that one up and also begin pushing Jerusalem artichoke as a fiber sweetener.
Now you think about how we used to eat before industrialization. Most of the population was along the coast, so they had a diet of fish, which gave them omega-3s and iodine, and you used to eat the fruits and vegetables that were in season and local to your area. And the last couple of 100 years, it's been nothing like that. And the table sugar, the sucrose that we have today, was very rare until industrialization because it's very labor intensive. There's a book, The Case Against Sugar by Gary Taub, gets into that history. Very, very interesting. Talks about how the Muslims brought it to the Middle East from Asia, how it was involved with slavery because you needed labor to produce this, and it was even used in cigarette tobacco to help make it more addictive.
Wow.
And his book came out before the news broke about how the sugar industry knew about the damaging effects of sugar about 50 years ago and covered up their research.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, Harvard University had a pimp for the sugar industry, a Dr. Stair, who used to push sugar as a good food. He was supported for all of his career by the sugar industry.
Yeah, and it gets into how all the recommendations for sugar were opinion-based by experts, not science-based. And unfortunately, we still have doctors today that are going on all those old opinions and helping to destroy their patients' health.
Yep.
And likewise with sugar, we got these processed oils, the corn oil, the soybean oil, the canola oil, all of those heavy omega-6 type oils that, even ignoring how they oxidize, go rancid, the high levels of omega-6 makes it to where even if you take omega-3, you can't properly utilize it because of how the competition is in the body. You actually have to cut down the amount of the omega-6 just so your omega-3s could work right. And I've even learned about like the differences, the version of omega-3 that you get from plants. Yes, that can be converted into EPA, DHA, but it does so at a very low rate. And if you've got these, sugar and glucose problems, insulin problems, that process doesn't even work very well. So these oils are just as bad for inflammation and causing chronic disease as sugar is. And we're already at the end of the first hour. John Regan, Dr. Norman Shealy, back after the break. Welcome back to USA Prepares. Vincent is out working on his farm today. It's that time of the year. He will be back tomorrow. This is John Regan with our Monday guest, Dr. Norman Shealy. We were talking a little bit about the really bad oils that unfortunately is what pushed and is in pretty much all the processed food along with sugar. And I figure this is a good point to let you vent on that part of it.
So, where would you like to go?
Well, get your comments on all these processed oils and what they do to us.
Oh, well, I consider them only just about as bad as smoking. In other words, if it's not real, it's poison. And so the only processed oils that I personally would allow into my house are virgin olive oil and avocado oil.
I've not used the avocado oil. I do use the extra virgin olive oil. Use a little bit of coconut oil occasionally, and grass-fed butter.
Yeah, a lot of people like coconut oil. I just haven't found it. It doesn't fit my recipes well, but there's nothing wrong with it as far as I know. But avocado oil is about as good as virgin olive oil.
Well, typically what I'll do is if I need to grease a pan, I'll often use the coconut oil for that. So it's not actually a part of the recipe so much as part of the cooking process.
Right.
And we covered the no sugar side, and then there was the no wheat side. And it's kind of like, wow, there's a lot in this area too. And it looks like part of the problem, I think it came about in the 50s. There was about wheat rust, and they developed a new strain of wheat, or new strains of wheat, to combat that. And the wheat that we have commercially today is not the wheat our forefathers ate.
Oh, they've done more genetic manipulation of wheat, I think, than any other product. Apparently, the number of genes in wheat has increased from about 4 to 52 over the last half century.
And then I guess it was in the 70s they started spraying it with glyphosate.
Well, that was the biggest poison of all.
Even if that doesn't damage human cells, which there's evidence of things like blocking absorption of minerals and other things of that nature, which are directly related to our human cells. In fact, Monsanto patented glyphosate for use as an antibiotic, which, when that gets into your gut, helps to kill off your gut microbiome, which is a good part of your immune system. And it was really disgusting to find out just how pervasive this poison is. I found an article where they had tested organic products, wheat and oats, and compared that to the commercially available. And you know how I run the numbers. If you took the most contaminated conventional product and compared that to the least contaminated of the organic product, you're still getting 30% of the amount of glyphosate. On the flip side, if you compare the cleanest of the commercial product with the most contaminated of the organic, you're getting about 80% of the level. So just switching to organic, you're probably getting somewhere about half the level you would have from the commercial product.
Well, interestingly, of course, John, now 65% of all rain has Roundup in it. there was a study done of organic versus non-organic wines in California a year or two ago. The organic wines had 35% as much Roundup as the regular contaminated wines. In other words, there's no such thing as real organic anymore. Unless you had some kind of controlled indoor atmosphere, every single product grown outdoors is already contaminated with Roundup.
At least on the plus side, we're starting to see, some wins in the courtroom that may eventually lead to that substance being banned. Unfortunately, it's going to take a while for it to reduce the levels that's actually out there in the environment.
Yes.
But again, when you're dealing with, these things, it's part of the process that causes inflammation in the body. You got sugar, you've got the oils, you've got the toxins, you've got stress, which, we have no shortage of today. That can be just from, the ordinary life to, lack of sleep. I was reading one study where they took perfectly healthy college students, sleep-deprived them for about 10 days or so, and they were already pre-diabetic. So it's multiple factors that leading into this chronic illness. You follow the inflammation chain. That typically, from what I'm seeing, sets off the insulin resistance problem, which then starts snowboarding in itself. It's the inflammation in the arteries that is causing problems, at which point the cholesterol is used as a patch for your arteries, which, if that builds up, it's not the cholesterol's problem, it's the inflammation problem that's leading into heart disease. And you can even track inflammation into problems with cancer. And Dr. Tennant set out a private video several months ago. Unfortunately, he's made a public one that covers some of the same topic. He talked about how cancer tumors are like a placenta, and I think they found this out about a century ago. And they didn't explicitly say it in this latest Truth About Cancer series, but they talked about how when you have cancer, it shows up in the same blood test they use for pregnancy. And this is the way Dr. Tennant explained it. It's like with the placenta, which is needed to support the environment for a baby with all the blood and nutrition that needs. It has that very fast growth rate, and I forget what day it is, going like day 42 or something. It stops that growth. Well, what we're seeing with these cancer tumors, and it changed my mind on cancer is something that bad that happens. It's like the cancer tumor is there to get more blood and nutrients as a last-ditch effort to save the body. And unfortunately, we're not correcting the problem, so it doesn't have the cutoff switch like a placenta does, so it keeps going and going and going, where the cancer itself causes the problem. And just see how the typical chemotherapy, radiation, surgery mentality just ignores so much other research that's out there on cancer. I'm sure as a doctor you find it all frustrating too.
Well, what I find most frustrating is our FDA. I would say that is the greatest problem in health and medicine today. I wouldn't trust them to tell me the time of day. For instance, there's a wonderful product called 4MU that is used to treat cancer in many other countries, but not allowed in this country. You're not allowed to buy it in this country.
Yeah, that's like in the first country they visited in this new Truth About Cancer series was Japan. One of the doctors refused to be interviewed. One of the things he's working with is the GCMAF, and that was, interestingly, one of the protocols being used by those natural doctors that all of a sudden had a certain surge of death rates a couple of years ago. And there was another doctor that they interviewed in Japan, and he'd written a book. I don't even know exactly what it's about, but the discussion went along the lines of, translating it into English. And he said he wouldn't do that because he'd be dead within 2 weeks. And he didn't even want to translate the title of the book. Unfortunately, that's the environment we live in. There's a lot of money to be made on the table, and there's a spiritual aspect to this as well. John Regan with Dr. Norman Shealy. We'll be back after the break. We're back tomorrow. This is John Regan with Dr. Norman Shealy. We're definitely not making friends with a lot of corporations today.
There must be one or two good corporations around.
And, it's kind of interesting when you start putting this picture together. And one of the videos I shared last year was where Dr. Levy took a fortified iron product, whether it was oatmeal or cereal, wheat or oats, and he put it into a blender with water, blend it up, and use a high-powered magnet, and show that it's not even a great form of iron they're supplementing with. It's just iron filings. And guess what? That causes inflammation too. So,
well, of course, we don't drink iron in any form. Well, any metallic form, right?
Well, even in what I learned in trying to manage hemochromatosis, eating too much beef is bad for you because of the heme version of the iron. Whereas if you get iron from plants like spinach, it doesn't cause the problem. So, one of the big things in our modern diet too is this fortified bread. So you sit down and look at what we get all in one place. You get the iron, you get the sugar, either in sucrose or high fructose corn syrup version. You get these bad oils, you get the wheat, and you get the glyphosate, all in one sitting.
Well, it's really interesting to me that the food industry has gone so far astray. It's really, 80% of the food sold in this country is not real food. 80%, 60% of what's in a grocery store is not real food. And anything sold in a fast food restaurant, I wouldn't even drink a cup of coffee there because they probably put monosodium glutamate even in the coffee because everything else they put monosodium glutamate in order to addict you, and it's dangerous to your brain.
Not to mention that, even if you filter your water at home, if you go out and have something to drink, it's going to have that wonderful fluoride in it, too.
Oh, yeah. Just another little poison, thanks to your city government.
Now, I need to, I clipped this a few years ago, so it's going to take me a while to dig it out. But I'd come across an interesting combination of toxins, and I think it was fluoride and possibly mercury. And you take the lethal dosage of those, where LD1, meaning 1% of the lab rats die at that dosage level. 1% of the one toxin plus 1% of the other toxin equals 100%. You add the toxic, that small amount that just kills 1% of each, add those together, and you've got 100% kill rate. So it gets beyond just looking at the individual items that we're consuming. It's the combination of them. And, it's amazing that, we're not in worse shape than we are.
That is true. By the way, fish protein has considerably less iron in it than beef. 2.7 milligrams of iron per 3-ounce serving of beef versus 1.1 gram for 3 ounces of fish.
And, when I started, doing this research, I mean, this is even before we moved to Springfield, still here in Texas. I was noticing that our problems, not just in the health side, but in what's going on, with the way we handle our society, all has biblical base. We'll talk about that when we get back. Great. John Regan with Dr. Norman Shealy, and as I was talking about before the break, when I was starting to do my research into things, sooner or later I would turn up a satanic connection, and it's like communism, and you start researching Marx, and you start, finding out, satanic connections to that, and the more I looked, I see so many of the problems we have is because we refuse to do things the way God told us to. We don't want to eat His food. We don't want to, follow His societal rules. And granted, this is an imperfect world, and, there's imperfections in anything that we would do. But, if we did like He said and forgave debt every 7 years, we wouldn't have this monstrous debt, which is over 70 trillion for the United States, over at least 250 trillion worldwide now, and that's going to get really interesting over the next few years. He gave instructions every 50 years that the land was re-divided up, which got rid of the inequality. Somebody couldn't just acquire more and more and more, like we see today, where the 1% control so much of what's going on. And He gave us all the answers, and unfortunately, even Christians don't want to do things God's way. I even find it interesting in, when He told Noah, take 2 of the unclean, 7 of the clean. He didn't have to explain it to them. They already knew what that was. And if you look at what was considered unclean, typically it was the scavengers, the cleanup crew, and those cleanup crew get contaminated with toxins. And while you can eat them, what we do today with shrimp and pork and things like that He said not to eat, it's not that you immediately get sick and die, but if you keep on eating it over and over and over, you get more and more of this toxic load in you, which ends up affecting your health. I just found that quite interesting. And, again, going back before the industrialization, we didn't have a lot of those problems. We had some sanitation issues, but we really didn't have any choice but to eat natural food. But once industrialization got here, and more people moved away from the farms, then you can even just follow the money on it. finding ways to produce more and make it last longer without spoiling. And between the greed and the arrogance, we're now reaping these wonderful health benefits of heart disease, cancer, diabetes that just were not as prevalent just a few decades ago. I'll go ahead and get off my soapbox right now. I want to transition into the microbiome after your comment.
Well, interestingly, it all is stress, ultimately. In other words, all disease, as far as I can tell, is a result of excess stress. Now, a lot of that stress is emotional, but there's physical stress, there's chemical stress, that's especially in altered foods. There's electrical stress, which we know. I mean, Vincent and I are particularly adverse, if you will, to cell phones, for instance. I refuse to use one except for utter emergencies. And there's nuclear stress from nuclear energy, which is the worst thing human race has ever done. There was a study that just came out of Scandinavia on siblings. And those who had the greatest emotional stress had a marked increase in heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. So it's not just genetics by any means. It is largely anger, guilt, anxiety, and depression over anything which creates the disease, coupled with the sloppy food.
A few months ago, there was a series came out called Interconnected, which interviewed leading researchers worldwide. I think about 10 or 12 hours worth of interviews I got to watch about the gut microbiome.
Ah, yes.
And I already knew that it was a good part of our immune system, but I learned so much more there. And one of the surprising things, what we consider us, our human cells, that's only 1% of our body by cell count. 99% is our gut microbiome.
Right.
And between antibiotics and glyphosate and all this stuff, we're destroying a lot of the good bacteria there. And even that, you talk about the fiber, we're not feeding the bacteria. The bacteria needs fiber. And we used to get that from eating more plants, but with our modern processed food, we don't get that. And I also found it interesting that I think it was on the order of 10 times the communication from the gut to the brain as there is the brain to the gut. And it was kind of funny that a lot of this research, they're wanting to find a magic bullet bacteria that they can patent and charge a lot of money for. But
and lead to more complications.
But that's not what they found, interestingly.
Right.
There wasn't a matter of just adding a bacteria. It was the variety of bacteria. To have a healthy microbiome, you need a wide variety. And it's just like an ecosystem. You go out, when I was in the Boy Scouts, you go out in the woods, and, variety of plants and animals out there. And, you can tell what was healthy and what wasn't. And you get in the city where a lot of that environment's been taken away, and, things don't necessarily work so well. And there's so many problems just in trying to find out what your microbiome looks like. I'm sure they're going to have, those, diagnostic pills you can swallow that can do the test, because just doing a stool sample will tell you some information about your microbiome, but it doesn't give a full picture. Then you got the problem of trying to get more good bacteria in there, because your stomach is your first line of defense, and that acid's going to destroy a lot of the bacteria going in. So it's challenging just getting things down that way. The other option is to go up, which is actually being done in some cases now. And even if you do put good bacteria in, you have to feed it, which is where the term prebiotics came about, getting the fiber that the bacteria need. And so much of this research has only been about the last decade or so. And, sadly, one of the comments made in one of the interviews is that it takes 17 years for information to make it from the researcher to the clinician. And I think that's actually optimistic, because there's so many things that, one of the examples I'm talking about today was the sugar with Dr. Lustig. That was 10 years ago, and I don't think any inroad has been made on that getting down to the clinician. And it can take years, sometimes decades, and in some cases, I think over 100 years for that change to occur.
Well, and there is the establishment's resistance to change. When Ignaz Philipp Semmelweis just pointed out that physicians were killing patients because they didn't wash their hands after doing an autopsy, he was essentially kicked out of the system. And when the circulation of the blood was discovered back in the 1500s, the physician discovering that was kicked out of the system. And so the system is as bad as industry in general. For some reason, there is a remarkable resistance to change.
And we're really seeing that today with the censorship that is going on. It's gotten to the point where you can't even mention legitimate studies about vaccines without getting yourself kicked off of social media.
Yeah. Well,
and,
the world is going crazy. But, John, my father, I can remember over 80 years ago hearing my father say common sense is the uncommon commodity. And compared to today, things were good then.
Yeah,
well, we can't all be perfect like us, but they could try.
Yeah.
I hope nobody ever takes me seriously when I say that.
It's not going to be pretty, but I think it's going to get to a point where they aren't going to be able to afford to do as much control as they want to.
That would be good.
Regardless of who is elected next year, whoever is president this next cycle, we're going to start seeing some vast changes in our country, and I'll discuss that when we get back. John Regan, Dr. Shealy. It's been a very quick 2 hours for me. Anyway, whoever is president is going to face some very serious problems. Lately, our federal debt has been doubling every 8 years. So we're at $22 trillion right now. Going from $20 trillion to $40 trillion would be around 2025. The other factor going on is interest rates. They're historically low. Just getting back to normal would be very interesting. And if we ever had interest rates like we had in the 80s, it would be absolutely devastating. But just adding a small amount to the interest rate, which that's also a factor, these low interest rates, and why our pension plans are in bad shape. By 2025, we get to the point where the government would have to borrow money just to pay interest on the debt. That would be no money for Department of Defense, no money for VA, no money for all these social programs. There would still be the amounts that Social Security and Medicare bring in, but those would have to have cuts as well. And we don't have to get to that point before it starts causing problems. What's going to happen over the next 4 years is they either we'll have to cut programs, which I doubt we'll see, or go into debt at a faster rate. And that's just the government. And even if they go into this magic money theory where they just keep on printing money and won't cause any problems, it's not just the federal government. You've got corporations. We've got what's called zombie corporations, a significant amount, double-digit percentage of established companies that don't earn enough money to pay interest on their debt. We've got people getting maxed out on debt. We just can't continue to grow the debt anymore. And when we hit that wall, it's going to be really, really ugly. Dr. Shealy?
Well, it's interesting to me because, obviously the people running the government are particularly stupid. I mean, basically, if any individual ran his or her household the way the government runs itself, everybody would be bankrupt. I mean, most corporations couldn't owe as much as the government does percentage-wise and survive. In fact, according to Wikipedia, only 1 year to Andrew Jackson's presidency is the only year in our history where we haven't had a debt.
Yeah, but you follow the whole history. They had to get rid of the good money, the gold and silver, and once they did that, they've been able to go on this spending spree with, debt made out of thin air, and that only works until you reach that point where you can't service the debt. There's other factors besides that. There's the demographics, which are getting ugly too. We're seeing a reduction in population, and it's really hitting Japan right now. We're seeing resource issues, including energy, and it's true that we still have a lot of oil out there, but the energy return on investment is going down. It used to be that it would cost a barrel of oil to get 100 barrels out of the ground. With fracking, it's costing a lot more than that in energy to get the energy out. So it's a big, complex picture, just like the human body is. Living in interesting times is fun and exciting. Fasten your seatbelt. Well, Dr. Shealy, thank you for being with us.
Hey, always great, John. Have a great week.
Thank you. And Vincent, we'll be back tomorrow.